Conscious capitalism may sound like the biggest oxymoron that you've ever heard. Is it possible for capitalism to be conscious, tuned into anything other than making money? Is there a purpose to capitalism besides making a buck? Well, I think there is. I think there is a higher purpose to capitalism that's important for us all. But you might say, well, what the hell has that got to do with us immediately? What the hell has that got to do with my business? And what has that got to do, Craig, honestly, with creativity? The answer is everything. Conscious capitalism is a way to potentially reinvent business, not just for the benefit of a few, but for the benefit of a great many. So when I ask you what are the greatest world-changing inventions, you might say the wheel. We'll think bicycles. Think the printing press, the light bulb, the telephone, cars, planes, the internet. But I'd suggest to you that there's actually an idea that's bigger than all of those, and it's called capitalism. Now, capitalism is a system for cooperation that's based on voluntary exchange for mutual benefit. What capitalism has done in the last 200 years is extraordinary. The examples are too numerous to recount in full, but capitalism has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Literacy has skyrocketed all around the world. And we now live in an age of prosperity and comfort that was entirely unimaginable, no matter who you were 200 years ago. But the most remarkable thing that's happened because of this idea we call capitalism is this. Is that life expectancy has changed radically in the last 200 years. I only put this chart together that went back to 2000 BC to 2000 AD, but I could have gone back hundreds of thousands of years, because what used to happen is you were born, you'd grow up, you'd club a girl, put her over your shoulder, take her back to the cave, have some babies, get to about 28, and you would die. And then in 2000 BC, not a lot had changed. You'd be born, you'd find a young bride, you'd have some kids, you get to about 28, 30, and you would die. And that was true all the way through here until you got to Christmas. The people who were born around Christmas, that was quite good because you had something to look forward to. But you only got about 28 or 30 of those and then you would die. But come along here to sort of 1750, 1800, and things started to change. And now the global average is 68. So we've gone from 28, 32, around about that kind of age to 68. That's an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. So we live 2 to 3 times longer. So capitalism, really what it's been, is, I would argue, the most powerful idea that we've ever had, because what it's done is it has become a platform for creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Capitalism has become all about the money. It seems that its sole focus is about money, making money, money. And I think it's been distorted by economists who have had a very narrow interpretation of capitalism and its potential, and an even narrower view of the true nature of human beings and their creative spirit. There's a guy called Milton Friedman, who was probably the most noted and most influential economist of the late 20th century, and he wrote a paper that was published in its entirety in the New York Times in 1970, in which, I won't read you the whole paper, in which he said the sole purpose of business is to maximize profits for shareholders. Now, Friedman was a genius, no doubt, but I think that sentence has been taken to the core of business thinking in the modern age and pushed to the absolute extreme. And then what happens? Well, the chart that we saw on life expectancy is a little mirrored by this one. And this is a very simple look at wealth distribution in the US. Some of you might have seen a video running around on this recently. If you haven't, you should look it up. This is the simple version of what wealth distribution looks like. So that's the bottom 10% down there, and the next 10, the 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. Up here is the 90 to 100%, the top 10% of people. But actually, if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. The real chart looks like this. Now, what it tells you is that 1% of the wealth in America is owned by a very 24% of the wealth is controlled by a very elite 1% of the population. The top 10% control most of it, and the bottom 40% have next to nothing. There's no middle class left. The notion of the middle class has disappeared. It's gone. According to Gallup, this is the reality. This is the global averages around engagement. 11% of the workforce is actively engaged with the company and its goals and what it's trying to achieve. 62% basically don't give a shit. And 27%, that's more than twice the first group, what Gallup call actively disengaged. What does that mean? Actively disengaged. I'll tell you what it means. They're terrorists. They're terrorists in the company, and they're doing their best to try and drag everyone else down. As the world becomes faster, as it becomes more complex, ambiguous, uncertain, we're going to need more creativity, not the same amount and certainly not less. And it's hard to come by. Now, famously now, and lots of people have spoken about this and cited this, and you may have read it yourself, in 2010, IBM did the largest ever survey of C-suite leaders, 1,500 CEOs and public sector leaders around the world, 33 countries. And they asked them a number of questions, but the killer question was this, which was, what is the most important leadership characteristic to ensure business success in the next 5 years? And overwhelmingly, and for the first time, they said creativity. 62% of them said creativity. Fantastic. Less well known is a study by Adobe last year, 2012. So Adobe didn't get to 15,000, but they got to 5,000 people. UK, US, France, Germany, Japan. And they asked those respondents a number of questions. One of them was, is creativity useful? Well, 80% of them said, yeah, it's the key to driving economic progress. It's the key to driving economic growth. Fantastic. Hallelujah. IBM and Adobe, they agree on the importance of it. But deeper in that Adobe study, there's more disturbing stuff. So only 1 in 4 people feel that they're in any way living up to their creative potential in the workforce. 3 in 5 people overall, 3 in 4 people in America go, being creative is really important to me, but only 25% of my time at work is in any way creative. So you see what I'm getting at? There's this kind of massive appetite for creativity, innovation over here as a driver of growth and prosperity. But the reality for most people is they're not plugged into it. They don't feel there's an opportunity, they're not feeling like they're being very creative, that they're being asked to be creative. In fact, a lot of the people in the Adobe study said, look, all I feel is increasing pressure to be productive, not creative in the workplace. So capitalism is immensely powerful and a noble idea, a truly world-changing idea. But maybe it's been limited in its interpretation, and maybe it's been hijacked by a few kind of greedy people. Most people aren't particularly happy with what they're doing, and most aren't very engaged with what they're doing. So clearly there's a need for more creative thinking, but most people are feeling maybe that in theory, but just the pressure to be more productive. So capitalism as currently framed isn't working that well, not for most people most of the time. So it's time to rethink business as usual and stop painting over the rust. And I think that, what marketing and advertising has done for a long time, in my view, is paint kind of around the outside of businesses, mostly. It's why most CMOs aren't on the board. It's important, marketing, really, really important, and it is. But most CMOs aren't on the board of the company, so it's not considered quite that important for most organisations. So maybe here's a chance for us to apply our creative thinking, our strategic skills, our problem-solving abilities to not the periphery, but the centre, the core, the heart and soul of business. And the reason I wanted to talk about this guy, his name is Jean Cocteau, not Jacques Cousteau, not the underwater explorer, but Jean Cocteau. And some of you may have heard of him before. Was a prolific artist. He was a novelist, a poet, a filmmaker, a sculptor, a ceramicist. He was lots of things. He's often depicted with kind of 8 arms, doing lots of different artistic things at once, including holding a gitane and a glass of Beaujolais because he was very French. And he had a studio in the south of France near Cannes. We all know Cannes. Cannes, famous for the film festival, the porn festival, and the advertising festival, in order of moral turpitude. And so he had a studio in a little place called Cap d'Antibes, which was just outside of Cannes. And his studio was famous. It was a hive of creative activity. And in the 1950s, a journalist came down from Paris to meet with Cocteau and to have a tour of the studio. And they walked around, Cocteau escorted him around, and there were people building sets for the Paris Opera. There were people writing music. There were people making film. There were people firing ceramics. All this activity. And at the end of the tour, the journalist asked Cocteau a really brilliant question. He said to Cocteau, if your studio was burning, what would you save? And Cocteau came up with a genius answer. He said, the fire. I would save the fire. So in other words, conscious capitalism, the notion of a more conscious way of doing business, isn't about being soft or being weak. It's actually about being smarter. It's actually about living up to the true potential that business and enterprise can deliver. And since 2007, I think there's a number of other factors that have escalated that make this idea more powerful. The first is we're all smarter. So every decade we get 4 IQ points smarter. So when you get to my age, you know, it's interesting to imagine going back in time and meeting myself as a kid. Hello, Craig. Oh, hello. You seem like a nice kid. Not very bright. No wonder you want to be, no wonder you want to be an artist. But you know, that difference is appreciable. So we're getting smarter. Individually, we're getting smarter. The second thing is that we're much better connected. So thanks to the web, which is now 20-something years old, it's got to the point where we kind of have a collective nervous system, a collective intelligence and a shared nervous system. Third point is that we're getting older. So the mean in the US now is about 44 years of age. In Japan, it's over 50. And with that comes naturally kind of middle-aged values and aspirations. We're all looking for meaning and purpose. They're becoming a bigger part of that shared nervous system. And the last thing is consciousness. So increasingly, we are aware that the decisions we make, the choices we make have consequences. We have an impact. So those 4 things combined make this notion of doing business in a different way, I think, more relevant, more pertinent, more immediate. So we're entering this age of transcendence as people are searching for higher meaning and they're looking for purpose. So a company that is just hell-bent on maximising profits doesn't work well for a bunch of smart people, super connected, looking for purpose, and well aware of the impacts that they have or might have in the world. But can you imagine just how powerful a company can become if people turn up voluntarily, not just in body, like Woody Allen, but in mind and in creative spirit? That would be, given all the numbers we've been through, truly, truly awesome. Well, how do you do that? People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do what you do. So that's sort of the 21st century spin on Nietzsche and Mark Twain, if you like. People want a really, really good why. And that's the first principle of conscious business, is that there should be a purpose to that business that is higher than profit. And if you're an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs don't start a business to make a lot of money because it's not the right reason. And it doesn't work if that's your motivation. They do it because they think there's a problem to solve, a service to be delivered, there's been something great to be achieved. The purpose is super important. So companies like Google, Whole Foods, BMW, Disney, Apple, they all have a very clear purpose. You know, Steve Jobs said a long time ago, when he first started and when he revisited the company, he said the purpose of Apple is to amplify human abilities. We have these abilities innately, our job is to amplify them. And there's a second principle that's really fundamental, which I touched on when I was talking about Raj. It's about understanding that the stakeholder ecosystem is not there to be screwed, it's there to be maximised, optimised. In other words, that there needs to be a series of win-win partnerships and arrangements that can be struck. Now, that's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. No one's pretending that it's easy, least of all me. I'm just talking about this. But the idea that you can create through your customers, employees, suppliers, investors, and the environment a series of win-win arrangements, and if you do that really well, you'll end up making people happier, people more fulfilled, and you'll end up making a whole lot more money on the way through.